Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into the dimly lit, restless world of Victorian insomnia, where sleep was less a gentle drift and more a nightly wrestling match with your own brain. Picture yourself in a creaky, gaslit London townhouse, circa 1880. The air smells faintly of coal dust and lavender water, and your lumpy mattress feels like it's plotting against you. Outside, horse hooves clop endlessly, and somewhere a dog barks like it's auditioning for chaos. You're tossing, turning, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this sleepless night without some truly weird remedies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not alone in this sleepless haze. The Victorians were obsessed with insomnia, and for good reason. It was practically an epidemic. Industrialization had turned their world upside down, cramming people into noisy cities and stretching workdays into the night. Sleep, once a natural rhythm, became a puzzle they couldn't solve. A mainstream fact doctors in the 1870s noted a surge in nervous disorders, with insomnia topping the list. Blaming everything from steam engines to spicy novels, they weren't wrong. Urban life was a sensory overload. But here's the quirky bit. Some physicians swore that sleeping with your head facing magnetic north would align your vital energies and cure sleeplessness. No kidding. They'd whip out compasses to orient your bed. Historians still argue whether this was pure placebo or if Victorians just loved any excuse to sound scientific. You're lying there, staring at the ceiling, and it's not just the lumpy mattress keeping you awake. The whole Victorian vibe was anti-sleep. Factories roared, gas lights buzzed, and the newfangled railways meant trains screeched at all hours. Your neighbors, they're probably hosting a seance. Because why not the middle class? Especially if felt the pressure to be productive. So staying up late reading or fretting over bills became a badge of honor. And here's where it gets weirdly relatable. They'd sip warm milk laced with opium drops, thinking it was a cozy nightcap. Spoiler, it wasn't. Joking aside, you'd probably try it too if your alternative was counting sheep until dawn. The era's doctors, bless their hearts, were throwing darts at a board labeled science. One prescribed wearing wet socks to draw heat from the brain. Good luck with that. You're starting to see why sleep was such a drama. The Victorians didn't just want rest, they wanted perfect rest. Like it was a moral failing to toss and turn. This obsession birthed a whole industry of cures, from potions to gadgets, each more outlandish than the last. You're about to dive into a world where sleep medicine meant anything from herb-stuffed pillows to electrified hairbrushes, and yeah, some of it worked mostly by scaring you into exhaustion. Imagine your doctor handing you a bottle labeled Dr. Snooze's Vital Tonic and winking. Would you trust it exactly? But before we get to the snake oil, let's linger on this. The Victorian sleepless nights weren't just physical, they were mental, emotional, and dare I say kind of poetic? You're awake. The world's too loud, and all you've got is a dodgy remedy and a prayer. You're still lying in that creaky Victorian townhouse, the gaslight flickering just enough to cast spooky shadows on the wallpaper. The clock ticks louder than it should, and outside, the city refuses to shut up. It's not just your imagination. Victorian urban life was a full-on assault on your eardrums. You hear a coal cart rattling, a street hawker yelling about oysters, and some distant factory whistle screaming like it's possessed. This is the soundtrack of your sleepless nights. And it's no wonder you're staring at the ceiling, clutching your pillow like a lifeline. The noise of the industrial age wasn't just annoying, it was a sleep thief. And the Victorians knew it. Let's set the scene with a mainstream fact. By the 1850s, cities like London and Manchester had swollen to millions, with factories, railways, and crowded tenements turning quiet nights into a myth. Noise complaints flooded newspapers, people wrote letters about church bells, drunken singers, and even overzealous roosters. Sound familiar? But here's the quirky tidbit. Some desperate souls stuffed their ears with breadcrumbs soaked in wax, swearing it blocked the din. Spoiler, it mostly just made their pillows gross. Historians still argue whether noise was the main insomnia culprit or just a convenient scapegoat for deeper anxieties, like money woes or the fear of spontaneous combustion, yes. That was a real Victorian panic. You're trying to tune it all out. But good luck. The streets are alive with chaos. Delivery wagons clatter over cobblestones, and night shift workers shout to each other in alleys. If you're in a posh neighborhood, maybe it's the clink of champagne glasses from a late-night soiree next door. Joking aside, that you'd probably trade your left shoe for a pair of modern noise-canceling headphones. The Victorians didn't have those, so they got creative. Some draped heavy curtains over windows, hoping to muffle the racket. Others moved their beds to the quietest corner of the house, usually the attic, only to realize it was freezing up there. One doctor even suggested sleeping with a live turtle under your pillow, apparently. Its soothing aura helped. Sure, Doc. The noise wasn't just outside, either. Your own house is a traitor. Floorboards creak, pipes gurgle, and if you've got a coal fire, it's popping like it's trying to start a band. The middle class especially felt trapped. They'd moved to cities for opportunity, but got a 24/7 soundscape instead. You're starting to get why insomnia was a hot topic in Victorian medical journals. Doctors called it urban neurasthenia, a fancy term for your nerves are fried. They weren't wrong, but their solutions were, let's say, optimistic. One popular fix was to sleep with a sound-absorbing rug under your bed. Did it work about as well as you'd expect from a rug? But you're desperate, so you try it, only to wake up sneezing from dust. This cacophony shaped more than just sleepless nights. It changed how Victorians thought about rest. Silence became a luxury, something only the rich could afford by escaping to country estates. If you're stuck in the city, you're stuck with the noise and it's grinding you down. You're not just fighting for sleep, you're fighting for sanity. And here's the kicker. All this racket made people crave quick fixes, like potions or pills, anything to knock them out. You're about to discover one of the most popular and dangerous of these remedies, a little something called laudanum. But for now, you're still awake. The city roaring, and that breadcrumb earplug idea is starting to sound tempting. You're still in that drafty Victorian bedroom, the city's clamor seeping through the walls like an uninvited guest. The clock's ticking is now a personal insult, and you're desperate for sleep, desperate enough to reach for a small, dark bottle on your nightstand labeled laudanum. It's not just any bedtime tonic, it's the Victorian equivalent of a sledgehammer for your brain. You pour a few drops into a glass of water, the liquid swirling like ink, and you hesitate. This stuff promises dreams, but it's got a reputation. One wrong move, and you're not waking up. Welcome to the risky world of laudanum, the era's go-to sleep aid that was as seductive as it was dangerous. Here's the mainstream fact laudanum. A tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol was a household staple by the 1860s, prescribed for everything from insomnia to toothaches to female complaints. Doctors loved it because it worked. Opium slows your heart rate and quiets your mind, sending you into a heavy, dreamless slumber. But here's the quirky bit: it was so common that grocers sold it alongside sugar and tea, and some folks spiked their evening sherry with it for a cozy nightcap. Historians still argue whether laudanum's popularity was driven by genuine medical need, or if Victorian society was just quietly hooked on its euphoric haze. You're holding that glass, the laudanum's bitter smell tickling your nose. It's not like you want to take it, but the alternative is another night of staring at the ceiling, counting cracks in the plaster. You've heard the stories, people who took too much and slipped into comas. Or worse, never woke up. Joking aside, you're half convinced this bottle is plotting your demise, like a villain in one of those gothic novels you shouldn't be reading at midnight. But doctors swear by it, and your neighbor, Mrs. Pembleton claims it's the only thing that gets her through her husband's snoring. So, you sip, just a little, and wait for the world to soften. The truth is, laudanum was a gamble. It wasn't just about sleep, it was about escape. Victorians faced long workdays, noisy cities, and a culture that fetishized productivity sound familiar. Laudanum let you check out, even if just for a few hours. But the side effects were brutal nausea, constipation, and if you used it too long, addiction that could wreck your life. You're starting to feel it now. A warm heaviness creeping into your limbs, like you're sinking into a velvet pool. It's nice. Sure, but there's an edge of unease. Did you take too much? You can't tell, and that's the problem. Nobody measured this stuff properly. Doctors prescribed a few drops, but a few meant whatever you poured in a panic. You're not alone in this foggy gamble. Writers like Charles Dickens and Elizabeth Barrett Browning were rumored to dabble in laudanum, and it was a favorite of overworked mothers and anxious clerks alike. It was cheap, legal, and dangerously accessible. Some pharmacies even sold candy laced with it for restless children. Yeah, let that sink in. You're drifting now, the room blurring. But you can't shake the thought this cure might be worse than the disease. And yet, laudanum wasn't the only sleep fix on the market. As you slip closer to sleep or something like it, you're about to discover a whole world of patent medicines, each one weirder and shadier than the last. For now, though, the laudanum's got you, and the city's noise is finally fading. You're floating in that hazy, laudanum-tinged fog. The city's noise dulled but not gone, like a bad guest who's finally lowered their voice. The dark bottle on your nightstand feels like a risky friend, and you're wondering if there's a safer way to chase sleep? Spoiler, there isn't. Not really. You glance at a colorful pamphlet slipped under your door, advertising Dr. Slumber's Vital Elixir, with promises of restful nights and vigorous days. It's one of dozens of patent medicines flooding Victorian markets, each bottle a mix of hope, hype, and questionable ingredients. You're about to dive into a world where insomnia cures were less science and more circus, peddled by slick salesmen who knew a sleepless mark when they saw one. Here's the mainstream fact by the 1880s. The patent medicine industry was a juggernaut, with thousands of cures for insomnia and other ailments sold over the counter or via mail-order catalogs. These concoctions often just alcohol, sugar syrup, and herbs were barely regulated, letting anyone with a catchy name and a printing press cash in. But here's the quirky tidbit: some remedies included bizarre additives like crushed pearls or essence of moonlight, claiming to soothe the lunar tides of the soul. Historians still argue whether these products were pure scams or if their placebo effect actually helped some desperate souls drift off. You're holding that pamphlet. Its bold letters screaming about guaranteed slumber. The bottle it describes is probably sitting in your local apothecary, next to Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup or Professor Zzz's nerve tonic. You're tempted, mostly because the laudanum's aftertaste is still haunting your tongue. Joking aside, but you'd probably sell your favorite teacup for a remedy that doesn't make you feel like you're auditioning for a ghost story. These patent medicines were everywhere ads plastered newspapers, promising miracles for a shilling. One claims to be distilled from alpine herbs, another infused with Indian dream spices. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds better than breadcrumbs in your ears, right? The reality is grimly funny. Most of these elixirs were booze with a side of lies. A typical bottle might be 40% alcohol, enough to knock you out but not exactly restful. Some threw in morphine or cannabis for extra kick, which explains why users felt cured until the headache hit. You're imagining the salesman now, all mustache and swagger, convincing you that his tonic of eternal repose is doctor-approved. Spoiler, the only doctor approving it is his cousin, who's also the bottler. One popular remedy, chlorodyne, mixed chloroform with opium, which sounds like a party you didn't sign up for. You're half tempted to try it, if only to see what eternal repose feels like without the eternal part. These products thrived because Victorians were desperate. You're not just fighting noise or stress. You're fighting a culture that says sleeplessness is your fault. Ads preyed on that guilt, with slogans like banish wakeful nights or sleep like a child again. You're starting to see the pattern promise big, deliver little, and hope nobody sues. Some remedies were harmless, like chamomile syrups, but others were deadly mercury-laced sleep powders weren't uncommon. You're lucky if your elixir just gives you a stomach ache. As you toss the pamphlet aside, you're wondering if there's a less dodgy way to sleep. Maybe something about hygiene or fresh air? The Victorians had thoughts on that too, and they're just as weird as you'd expect. You're back in that creaky Victorian bedroom. The laudanum bottle glaring from the nightstand, and that shady Dr. Slumber's elixir pamphlet crumpled on the floor. You're done with potions for now. They're either too risky or too ridiculous, like that essence of moonlight nonsense. Maybe the answer isn't in a bottle, but in the air itself. You've heard doctors preaching about sleep hygiene, a fancy term for rules to trick your body into resting. It sounds sensible, but Victorian ideas about fresh air and proper bedtime habits were a wild mix of genius and gibberish. You're about to crack a window and dive into a world where opening your bedroom to the night breeze was both a cure and a comedy of errors. Here's the mainstream fact by the 1870s. Victorian physicians were obsessed with hygienic sleep, blaming insomnia on stuffy rooms and improper ventilation. Medical journals urged people to sleep with windows wide open, claiming fresh air would purify the blood and calm the nerves. But here's the quirky tidbit: some doctors took it to extremes, advising patients to sleep outdoors on rooftops or in airing courts to soak up maximum oxygen. Historians still argue whether this was a legitimate health trend or just a romantic obsession with nature. Like pretending you're a woodland poet instead of a city clerk. You're tugging at the window sash now, and it groans like it's personally offended. A chilly gust sweeps in, carrying the faint whiff of coal smoke and horse manure, the fresh air of London. Joking aside, you're half convinced this is less about health and more about proving you can survive a night without freezing. The idea was that stale indoor air, heavy with miasma's bad vibes, basically kept you awake, while a brisk breeze would lull you to sleep. Doctors swore by it, citing cases where patients slept better after airing their rooms. You're trying it, but the wind's rattling your curtains and you're wondering if purified blood is worth pneumonia. It wasn't just about windows. Sleep hygiene was a whole lifestyle. You're supposed to avoid heavy meals, strong tea, or exciting novels before bed. Good luck with that when your sister's lending you the latest Bronte thriller. Some physicians recommended sleeping on hard mattresses to align the spine, which feels like lying on a plank. Others pushed ventilated pillows stuffed with horsehair to keep your head cool. You're picturing it now, a pillow that wheezes like an accordion every time you move. One doctor even suggested tying a sponge to your forehead to absorb nervous energy. Sure, because nothing says restful like looking like a sea creature. The logic was shaky, but you can see why it caught on. Victorians loved rules, especially ones that sounded scientific. Fresh air fit their obsession with purity, clean body. Clean mind, clean sleep. Except cities weren't exactly brimming with alpine breezes. You're breathing in fog so thick it's practically soup, and the fresh air is laced with factory soot. Still, you're giving it a shot, wrapping yourself in extra blankets to offset the chill. It's not working yet, but there's something oddly calming about the ritual, like you're doing sleep right. As you settle back, you're starting to wonder about the fancier folks. How did the rich tackle insomnia? Their bedtime routines were next level, and you're about to step into their world of velvet and absurdity. You're shivering under a pile of blankets, that fresh air from the open window now feeling like a personal vendetta. The city's grime is probably settling on your face, and you're done pretending this sleep hygiene thing is magical. Maybe the problem isn't the air, but your whole bedtime setup. You're picturing the wealthy Victorians now, tucked into their mahogany four-posters with silk drapes, probably sleeping like royalty, or at least faking it. Their bedchamber rituals were a whole production, a mix of luxury, superstition, and straight-up weirdness. You're about to slip into their world, where getting ready for bed was less a routine and more a ceremony. complete with props and a touch of paranoia. Here's the mainstream fact by the mid-19th century. The Victorian upper class turned bedtime into an elaborate ritual, with specific steps to ensure proper rest and ward off insomnia. Guides like The Lady's Book of Etiquette detailed everything from bed linen choices to prayer schedules. But here's the quirky tidbit some aristocrats slept with a dream sachet under their pillow. Think lavender, rose petals, and, yes, a pinch of dried toad skin for spiritual protection. Historians still argue whether these rituals were about sleep or just flexing social status, showing off wealth through absurdly complicated habits. You're imagining it now. You're not in your creaky townhouse anymore, but a grand Mayfair mansion. Your bedroom's a fortress of velvet and candlelight, the air heavy with beeswax and pomade, a maid's fussing over your bed, turning down sheets so crisp they could star in a laundry ad. Joking aside, you'd probably trip over the sheer number of pillows, 6, maybe 7, each with a specific job like neck support or aesthetic fluff. The routine starts hours before bed. You're sipping a soothing tisane of chamomile and valerian, which tastes like lawn clippings but supposedly calms your nerves. Then comes the hair-brushing 100 strokes, no less to stimulate the scalp and, apparently, your patience. It gets weirder. You're slathering your face with a cream made of lanolin and crushed violets. Because beauty sleep isn't just a phrase, it's a mandate. Your nightgown's a cloud of linen, starched to perfection, and you're slipping into bed warmed by a copper pan filled with hot coals. One eccentric lord insisted on sleeping with a live canary in a cage by his bed, claiming its chirps harmonized his dreams. You're side-eyeing that one, but you're also tucking a dream sachet under your pillow, just in case the toadskins got some magic. The final step of prayer to ward off night demons, because Victorians were nothing if not dramatic about their souls. These rituals weren't just about comfort, they were about control. Insomnia was seen as a failure of discipline, especially for the elite, who had no excuse with their fancy beds and quiet estates. You're starting to feel the pressure, like sleep's a performance you're flunking. The rich had the means to obsess over every detail: custom mattresses, imported herbs, but it didn't always work. You're lying there, surrounded by luxury, and still wide awake. Maybe it's time to try something even wilder. Like those magnetic cures you've heard about, the Victorians loved their pseudoscience, and you're about to discover just how far they'd go to chase a good night's rest. You're nestled in that plush Mayfair bedroom, the dream sachet under your pillow smelling like a florist shop with a hint of questionable toadskin. Despite the velvet drapes and warmed bed, sleep's still dodging you like a pickpocket in a London fog. You're starting to think those fancy rituals were more about showing off than actual rest. Now, whispers of a newfangled cure are floating around the drawing rooms, something about magnets and their mystical power to pull you into slumber. You're skeptical, but the Victorians were all about slapping science on wild ideas. So you're ready to explore this magnetic madness and see if it's the sleep fix you've been missing. Here's the mainstream fact in the 1870s. Magnetism became a trendy medical fad, with practitioners claiming it could cure insomnia by rebalancing the body's vital energies. Devices like magnetic belts and headbands were sold in apothecaries, endorsed by doctors who loved anything that sounded cutting edge. But here's the quirky tidbit: some enthusiasts went full sci-fi, sleeping on beds studded with magnets or wearing magnetic slippers to ground their energies. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine belief in magnetism's power or just a placebo-fueled craze, like the Victorian version of a trendy wellness app. You're picturing it now: a salesman in a top hat hands you a magnetic sleep crown, a clunky headband with iron disc that looks like it belongs in a blacksmith shop. He swears it'll align your brain's currents and send you to dreamland. Joking aside, you're half convinced this thing will just give you a headache, or worse, make you look like a budget Frankenstein's monster. But you strap it on, because what's one more weird experiment? The idea is that magnets somehow soothe your overactive nerves, which are apparently buzzing like a telegraph wire from all that city noise and laudanum you tried earlier. The science, if you can call it that, was shaky. Doctors borrowed from mesmerism, a half-baked theory about animal magnetism controlling health. They'd wave magnets over your body or make you hold metal rods, claiming it recharged your sleep centers. You're trying it, lying there with the crown digging into your scalp, waiting for a miracle. Spoiler. It feels like nothing, except maybe a faint tingle you're probably imagining. One popular gadget, the magnetic slumber pad, was just a mattress cover with magnets sewn in great until they poked through and stabbed you awake. You're starting to suspect these cures are less about sleep and more about selling hope to frazzled Victorians. Still, the hype was real. Newspapers ran ads for magnetic clinics where you'd sit in a magnetized room for hours, supposedly soaking up restful vibes. Wealthy ladies hosted magnetic soirees, passing around magnetized wands like they were sharing a dessert tray. You're chuckling at the thought, but you get the appeal anything's better than counting cracks in the ceiling again. The problem, no one could prove it worked. Some swore they slept better, but that might have been exhaustion or the chamomile tea they drank on the side. As you toss the magnetic sleep crown aside, you're wondering if the answer lies not in gadgets, but in something more basic, like what you're eating. Victorian diets were their own kind of chaos, and you're about to find out how they messed with sleep. You're back in your creaky townhouse, the magnetic sleep crown discarded on the floor, its iron discs glinting like a failed science experiment. The city's hum is still seeping through the walls, and you're wondering if you're doomed to another night of staring at the ceiling. Maybe it's not magnets or toadskin sachets keeping you awake. Maybe it's what you ate for dinner. Victorian meals were a culinary roller coaster, heavy on meat, starch, and questionable spices. And doctors were starting to connect the dots between your overstuffed stomach and your restless nights. You're about to dive into the world of Victorian dining and discover how their food choices turned bedtime into a battleground. Here's the mainstream fact by the 1860s. Medical texts like The Physiology of Digestion warned that heavy, late-night meals could disrupt sleep, blaming indigestion for insomnia. Doctors advise lighter fare, think broth or biscuits before bed, to ease the stomach's workload. But here's the quirky tidbit some physicians claimed: specific foods, like overripe cheese or pickled herring, triggered night terrors by overheating the brain. Historians still argue whether these dietary theories were grounded in science or just Victorian fussiness about moral eating. Like blaming spicy curry for your sinful thoughts. You're replaying tonight's dinner a slab of mutton, boiled potatoes drowned in gravy, and a slice of sweet pudding that's sitting in your gut like a brick. Joking aside, you're half convinced that pudding's staging a sit-in, refusing to digest until dawn. Victorians loved their hearty spreads, especially the middle class, who saw three-course dinners as a status symbol. But eating at 8 p.m., then waddling to bed by 10 was a recipe for disaster. Your stomach's churning, and you're burping up hints of onion charming. Doctors called this dyspepsia, a catch-all for indigestion they blamed for everything from sleeplessness to bad moods. They weren't wrong. A gut full of roast beef doesn't exactly whisper sweet dreams. The advice was all over the place. Some doctors pushed vegetarianism, claiming meat inflamed the passions and kept you awake. Others swore by a nightly glass of port to settle the stomach, which sounds suspiciously like an excuse to drink. You're tempted to try the biscuit cure, a plain cracker with weak tea, but the idea of nibbling like a mouse feels insulting after that mutton feast. One eccentric physician, Dr. William Banting, suggested sleeping with a hot water bottle on your stomach to aid digestion. You're picturing it now, a human furnace, sweating through your nightgown while the bottle leaks. Hard pass. What's wilder is how class shaped this. The poor ate what they could bread, dripping. Maybe some dodgy fish often late after long workdays, which wrecked their sleep too. Meanwhile, the rich nibbled on delicacies like turtle soup or aspic, then wondered why they were up all night. You're starting to see the pattern. Nobody was eating for sleep. Food was about survival or showing off, not health. And don't forget the tea. Victorians guzzled it like water. Caffeine and all. Then scratched their heads when they couldn't nod off. As you lie there, Stomach grumbling? You're wondering if women had it worse. Gender played a big role in insomnia cures, and you're about to find out how the ladies navigated this sleepless mess. You're sprawled in that lumpy townhouse bed, the ghost of mutton and sweet pudding still haunting your stomach, making sleep feel like a distant cousin who never visits. The city's noise is a dull roar, and you're starting to think your diet isn't the only thing stacking the odds against rest. If you're a woman in this Victorian world, insomnia isn't just a nuisance, it's a gendered minefield. Society's got opinions about your delicate nerves, and doctors are quick to prescribe cures that sound more like etiquette lessons than medicine. You're about to step into the peculiar world of women's sleep struggles, where remedies were shaped by corsets, chaperones, and a whole lot of patriarchal nonsense. Here's the mainstream fact in the 1880s. Medical texts like The Female Malady described women as prone to insomnia due to their fragile constitutions, with doctors linking sleeplessness to menstruation, pregnancy, or hysteria. Treatments often focused on calming the overwrought female mind. But here's the quirky tidbit: some physicians recommended sleeping with a silk scarf tied loosely around the neck to regulate blood flow and ease nervous tension, basically. A fancy chokehold for slumber. Historians still argue whether these gendered cures were rooted in biology or just a way to keep women docile, tucked away in their proper place. You're picturing it now. You're a Victorian lady, hair pinned up, corset finally off, thank goodness, slipping into a nightgown that's more lace than fabric. Your doctor's handed you a pamphlet titled Rest for the Fairer Sex, and it's a laundry list of rules. No reading novels that'll excite your passions. No late-night chats with friends that's taxing to the spirit. And definitely no coffee, because caffeine's apparently a one-way ticket to a nervous breakdown. Joking aside, like you'd probably smuggle a cup just to feel alive. Corset or no corset. The scarf trick sounds dubious, but you're desperate. So you drape it around your neck, feeling like a cross between a debutante and a poorly wrapped gift. The reality was rough. Women faced unique pressures, marriage prospects, household duties, and the constant expectation to be angelic while managing a home. Sleeplessness was often blamed on overthinking, as if men never lay awake fretting over bills or bad investments. Doctors prescribed tonics like Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, a boozy mix of herbs marketed as a cure for female sleeplessness. You're sipping it now, and it tastes like regret with a hint of licorice. Some women were told to take cold baths before bed to shock the nerves into repose. You're shivering at the thought, wondering if drowning might be the real sleep aid here. What's worse? Insomnia was a social trap. If you looked tired, gossiping neighbors might whisper about your failing health or, worse, your morals. You're catching the drift. Women weren't just fighting for sleep, but for respectability. Wealthy ladies had it slightly easier, with maids to handle chores, but they still faced bizarre cures like rest cures that confined them to bed for weeks. Ironic for insomniacs. You're starting to feel the weight of it all, scarf and all. As you untie it, you're wondering about the shadier side of sleep fixes. Quack doctors were lurking, ready to sell women and men the wildest contraptions yet. And you're about to meet them. You're back in that drafty townhouse, the silk scarf tossed aside like a bad idea. Your stomach still grumbling from that ill-advised mutton dinner. The pressure to sleep like a proper lady is fading, but the city's hum keeps you tethered to wakefulness. You're done with gendered tonics and questionable neckwear. Maybe it's time to try something bolder, like the gadgets peddled by those smooth-talking quack doctors you've seen in newspaper ads. These so-called experts promise sleep with contraptions that sound like they belong in a mad scientist's lab. You're about to wade into the shady world of Victorian sleep scams, where charlatans sold hope in the form of electrified brushes, vibrating beds, and other absurdities. Here's the mainstream fact by the 1870s. The lack of medical regulation let anyone claim to be a sleep specialist, and quack doctors flooded the market with devices marketed as insomnia cures. Advertisements in The Times hyped products like electrotherapeutic belts that promised to jolt your nerves into rest. But here's the quirky tidbit: one popular gadget, The Somnus vibratory cap was a helmet that buzzed your scalp with tiny springs, supposedly to massage the brain into slumber. Historians still argue whether buyers genuinely believed in these contraptions or were just desperate enough to try anything. Like you are right now. You're flipping through a catalog, its pages filled with sketches of gleaming gizmos. There's a galvanic sleep band, a metal strap you wrap around your forehead, delivering mild electric shocks to realign your vital currents. Joking aside, you're pretty sure this is less about sleep and more about auditioning for a lightning rod. You're tempted. Though the ad claims it's endorsed by eminent physicians, probably the salesman's brother. You're imagining strapping it on, feeling a faint buzz, and wondering if you're being cured or just mildly tortured. The catalog also touts a pneumatic sleep chair that inflates and deflates to rock you into repose. Sounds cozy until you realize it squeaks like a bagpipe. These quacks were masters of hype. They set up sleep clinics in back alleys where you'd pay a shilling to lie on a magneto-vibratory bed that shook like a runaway carriage. You're picturing it now, you're rattling around, clinging to the sides while the doctor counts his coins. One device, the etheric sleep wand, was just a stick you waved over your face to disperse wakeful energies. You're chuckling, but Victorians ate it up. Desperation makes you gullible. Some gadgets were harmless, like weighted blankets and early win, but others, like mercury-laced sleep salts, could kill you. You're lucky if your quack's scam just leaves you broke. The sad part. These contraptions thrived because real doctors weren't much better. You're starting to see why people turned to charlatans. Laudanum was risky, magnets were nonsense, and fresh air gave you a cold. But there's another cure floating around, one that sounds almost mystical: hypnotism. It's gaining traction in parlors and clinics, promising to lull you into sleep with nothing but a swinging watch and a soothing voice. You're curious, and as you push the catalog aside, you're ready to explore this dreamy new frontier. You're still in that restless townhouse, the catalog of quack gadgets kicked under the bed, its promises of electrified sleep fading like a bad dream. The city's pulse keeps you awake, and you're starting to think you've tried everything short of waving a magic wand. But wait, there's a new craze in town: hypnotism, whispered about in drawing rooms and dimly lit clinics. It's not magic, they say, but it feels like it. A stranger stares into your eyes, swings a pocket watch, and suddenly you're drifting off. You're ready to explore this hypnotic world where Victorians chased sleep through trance and suggestion, hoping to finally outsmart their insomnia. Here's the mainstream fact by the 1880s. Hypnotism, inspired by pioneers like James Braid, was gaining traction as a medical tool, with practitioners using it to treat insomnia by inducing a mesmeric sleep state. Clinics in London offered sessions to calm overactive minds. But here's the quirky tidbit: some hypnotists claimed they could plant dreams, like suggesting you'd dream of a peaceful meadow, and Victorians swore it worked. Historians still argue whether hypnotism's success was psychological or just theatrical placebo. With patients so desperate they'd nap under any soothing voice. You're at a hypnotist's parlor now, a cramped room with velvet curtains and a ticking clock. The hypnotist, all whiskers and gravitas, tells you to relax as he dangles a silver watch. Joking aside, but you're half expecting him to say abracadabra and turn you into a chicken. You're skeptical, but game after laudanum, magnets, and that vibrating cap. What's one more weird experiment, he's murmuring. Your eyelids are heavy, and you're trying not to giggle. The room's warm. The watch sways. And, you're actually feeling drowsy. Is this working, or are you just bored? The idea is to bypass your racing thoughts, lulling your mind into a state halfway between sleep and trance. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Hypnotism had a shady side. Charlatans used it to scam clients, and rumors swirled about improper influence over vulnerable women. You're wondering if this guy's legit or just fishing for gossip while you're under. Still, the science was intriguing. Braid argued hypnotism tapped the nervous system, slowing your heart rate and easing tension. Some patients reported sleeping through the night after a session, though others just got headaches. You're sinking deeper now. the watch a blurry pendulum, and you're picturing that meadow until the cart rattles outside, snapping you awake. Typical. The craze was short-lived but electric. Wealthy folks hosted hypnotic soirees, where guests took turns mesmerizing each other, like a Victorian version of a sleepover game. You're chuckling, imagining your neighbor, Mrs. Pembleton, swinging a locket and declaring herself a sleep guru. Medical journals debated it fiercely, some called it revolutionary. Others quackery? You're on the fence, but the sessions left you oddly calm, even if you're not quite asleep. As you leave the parlor, you're wondering if the real insomnia culprit isn't gadgets or trances, but something deeper, like the Victorian obsession with overthinking. That's next on your list, and you're ready to dig into it. You're trudging back to your townhouse, the hypnotist's swaying watch still lingering in your mind like a half-remembered lullaby. The city's noise-clattering carts, shouting vendors slaps you awake, and you're wondering if that trance was just a fancy nap. Hypnotism was nice, but it didn't stick, and you're still chasing sleep like it's a runaway horse. Now, you're hearing whispers of another insomnia culprit, your own brain. Victorians were obsessed with overthinking, blaming restless minds for sleepless nights. You're about to dive into this moral panic, where mental strain was treated like a sin, and sleep became a test of your virtue. Here's the mainstream fact in the 1870s. Doctors like George Beard wrote about neurasthenia, a nervous exhaustion blamed for insomnia, with excessive brain work as the prime suspect. They argued reading, worrying, or even debating politics could overheat your mind, keeping you awake. But here's the quirky tidbit: some physicians claimed writing poetry or keeping a diary was especially dangerous, as it stirred the imagination into a sleepless frenzy. Historians still argue whether this was a real medical issue or just a way to shame people, especially women, for thinking too much, as if a quiet mind was a moral duty. You're lying in bed now. The gaslight dimmed, but your brain's running like a steam engine. You're replaying yesterday's argument with your cousin about wallpaper patterns, then fretting over tomorrow's bills. Joking aside, you'd probably trade your left boot for a brain with an off switch. Victorians saw this as a crisis modern life, with its newspapers, telegraphs, and social pressures, was frying your nerves. Doctors warned against mental overstimulation, urging you to avoid spicy novels or chess matches before bed. You're guilty on both counts. And now you're wondering if that gothic romance you read is why you're counting ceiling cracks again. The advice was absurdly strict. One physician, Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, suggested brain rest for insomniacs, meaning no reading, writing, or even talking for weeks. You're picturing it, staring at a wall, forbidden from thinking about anything but toast. Good luck enforcing that. Others pushed moral hygiene, like praying or meditating on pure thoughts to calm the mind. You're trying it, muttering a prayer, but your brain's still buzzing about whether you locked the back door. Some doctors even blamed insomnia on immoral habits, a vague jab at anything from late-night snacks to daydreaming. You're rolling your eyes, your only sin is wanting to sleep. This panic hit women hardest. As usual, they were told their delicate minds couldn't handle intellectual strain. So insomnia was their fault for reading or worrying about, say, their entire future. Men got flack too, clerks, and businessmen were warned against overtaxing their brains with ledgers or stock market bets. You're feeling the weight of it, like your thoughts are a crime scene. The irony: all this guilt about overthinking just made you think more. As you try to quiet your mind, you're hearing about strange places called sleep asylums, where insomniacs were sent to be fixed. That's your next stop, and you're bracing for something eerie. You're still tangled in the sheets of your townhouse bed, your brain refusing to shut off after that dive into the Victorian fear of overthinking. The city's clamor feels like it's mocking your efforts to quiet your mind, and you're wondering if you're doomed to be a case study in some doctor's neurasthenia pamphlet. Now, rumors are swirling about places where insomniacs like you are sent to be cured. Sleep asylums, strange institutions designed to force rest through isolation, routine, and a touch of creepy control. You're about to step into these eerie sanctuaries where the line between hospital and prison blurs, and sleep is less a gift than a mandate. Here's the mainstream fact by the 1880s. Rest cures and specialized asylums for nervous disorders, including insomnia, popped up across Europe and America, inspired by figures like Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, who believed strict regimens could reset the body's rhythms. Patients were confined to bed, fed bland diets, and banned from mental stimulation. But here's the quirky tidbit: some asylums use sleep rooms lined with dark velvet and filled with white noise machines, think humming fans, to mimic a womb-like calm. Historians still argue whether these places helped or just traumatized patients, turning rest into a form of punishment. You're picturing it now. You've been whisked to a sleep asylum in the countryside, far from London's racket. The building's all Gothic arches and cold stone, like a haunted manor playing doctor. A stern nurse leads you to a rest ward, where you're told to lie on a narrow cot, no books, no visitors, just you and a ticking clock. Joking aside, now you'd probably smuggle a penny dreadful under the mattress just to feel human. The rules are brutal: no talking, no sitting up, and meals of gruel that taste like wet cardboard. The goal? To bore you into sleep. You're staring at the velvet walls, wondering if you're being cured or just forgotten. The logic was bizarre, but rooted in the era's obsession with control. Doctors believed insomnia came from a disordered will, so they'd strip away your agency to rebuild it. You're fed, bathed, and even turned in bed like a human doll. Some asylums used hydrotherapy, dunking you in warm baths for hours to soothe the nerves. You're imagining it: you're pruning in a tub, half asleep, half drowning, while a nurse lectures you on restful thoughts. One asylum in Surrey even played soft organ music at night, claiming it harmonized the soul. You're not sure if it's working or just making you crave a church service. The dark side was real. These places were often for the wealthy, think nervous heiresses or stressed bankers, but the poor got shunted to grim public asylums, where rest meant sedation. You're lucky if you're in a fancy one, but even then, the isolation's crushing. Some patients slept better, others left more anxious than ever. You're starting to feel claustrophobic just thinking about it, and you're glad to be back in your own bed. Lumpy as it is, but something else is nagging you. How did technology like those buzzing gas lights mess with sleep? That's your next stop, and you're ready to trace the wires? You're back in your creaky townhouse, the oppressive hush of that sleep asylum fading like a bad dream. Though the city's noise is quick to remind you why sleep's so elusive. The gaslight on your wall flickers, casting jittery shadows, and you're starting to wonder if the very tools of Victorian progress are conspiring against your rest. Gaslights, clocks, railways, these marvels of the age are everywhere, stretching days into nights and messing with your body's rhythm. You're about to trace how technology turned sleep into a casualty of the Industrial Revolution, making insomnia not just a personal struggle but a modern plague. Here's the mainstream fact by the 1860s. Artificial lighting like gas lamps extended work and social hours, disrupting natural sleep cycles, with studies later showing that exposure to light at night suppresses melatonin production. Victorians stayed up later, reading or socializing, blurring the line between day and night. But here's the quirky tidbit: some doctors blamed clock mania, the obsession with precise timekeeping, for insomnia, claiming ticking clocks made people anxious about wasting sleep hours. Historians still argue whether technology was the primary driver of sleeplessness, or just amplified existing stresses, like that overthinking panic you explored earlier. You're staring at that gaslight now. It's hissed like a tiny serpent. It's bright enough to read by, which is great until you're up at 2 a.m. with a novel, heart racing from a cliffhanger. Joking aside, you'd probably trade this lamp for a candle just to force yourself to bed earlier. Gaslighting was a game-changer. Streets glowed, theaters ran late, and your neighbors threw dinner parties till dawn. But it tricked your brain into thinking night was optional. You're trying to dim the flame, but it's still too bright, and your eyes are wide open, begging for darkness. One doctor suggested sleeping with a black cloth over your face to block light. Sure, because nothing says cozy like smothering yourself. Then there's the clock. That relentless ticking on your nightstand isn't just keeping time, it's judging you. Every talk screams that you're not asleep yet. Victorians were clock-obsessed, with factories and trains running on strict schedules. You're feeling it if you don't sleep soon. You'll be a wreck for tomorrow's errands. Some folks tried silent clocks with muffled gears, but good luck finding one that doesn't cost a month's rent. And don't forget railways trains screech through the night, their whistles slicing into your dreams. You're half tempted to move to a cave. But even then, you'd probably hear a steam engine in the distance. Technology wasn't all bad. Gas heaters warmed chilly bedrooms, and some swore by electric sleep lamps that pulsed soft light to mimic a sunset. You're skeptical they sound like quack gadgets with better branding? The real issue is balance progress gave you light and time, but stole your rest. You're starting to see how all these cures laudanum, magnets, asylums were desperate patches for a world that wouldn't slow down. As you blow out the gaslight, you're wondering how this chaotic era shaped modern sleep science? That's your final stop. And you're ready to tie it all together. You're lying in your townhouse bed. The gaslight finally snuffed out, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight through the curtains. The city's noise is a dull hum now, and you're reflecting on the wild ride of Victorian insomnia cures from laudanum's risky haze to the ticking clocks that turned time into a tyrant. It's clear why sleep was such a struggle, a world of noise, light, and pressure left everyone scrambling for rest. But did these bizarre remedies leave any mark? You're about to explore how the Victorians' sleepless saga shaped modern sleep science, connecting their quirky experiments to the advice you might find in a 21st century sleep app. Here's the mainstream fact. Victorian research into insomnia, despite its flaws, laid groundwork for modern sleep science, with pioneers like Dr. William Hammond studying nervous exhaustion and linking it to sleep disorders in the 1870s. Their work inspired later discoveries about circadian rhythms. But here's the quirky tidbit: those velvet-lined sleep rooms in asylums. They're distant cousins of today's sensory deprivation pods, designed to block stimuli and calm the mind. Historians still argue whether Victorian cures were mostly guesswork, or if their trial-and-error approach accidentally stumbled onto real insights, like the value of darkness and routine. You're picturing it a Victorian doctor, all whiskers and optimism, scribbling notes about your laudanum dose, not knowing he's contributing to a science that'll one day use brain scans. Joking aside, you'd probably send him a thank you note for trying, even if his wet sock cure made you sneeze. The Victorians got some things right. Fresh air, though not the coal soot kind, does help sleep by regulating body temperature. Their obsession with light exposure wasn't far off either. Today's experts preach blue light avoidance, echoing those black cloths you laughed at. Even hypnotism, for all its parlor trick vibes, foreshadowed modern cognitive therapies that calm racing thoughts. But the misses were epic. Laudanum's a cautionary tale, addictive and deadly. It's why we now have strict drug regulations, those magnetic crowns and vibrating caps. They're the great-grandparents of today's sketchy sleep tech gadgets, promising miracles for a quick buck. You're chuckling, imagining a Victorian quack hawking a Somnus vibratory cap on a late-night infomercial. The moral panic about overthinking wasn't wrong. Stress is a sleep killer, but blaming poetry or novels was pure nonsense. You're grateful modern science swapped that for meditation apps and white noise machines, which owe a nod to those humming fans in sleep asylums. The real legacy is perspective. Victorians saw insomnia as a personal failing, but today we know it's a mix of biology, environment, and lifestyle thanks to their early stumbles. You're feeling a strange kinship with those restless souls, tossing in their beds, trying everything from toadskin sachets to clockless nights. They didn't solve insomnia, but they asked the right questions, even if their answers were bonkers. As you settle deeper into your pillow, the city's hum fading. You're wondering if sleep's less about cures and more about balance, something even we modern folks struggle with. Now, let's ease you towards sleep. letting the Victorian world drift away like mist. Picture a quiet meadow, far from gaslights and rattling carts, where the air is soft with lavender and the stars pulse gently overhead. Your breath slows, each inhale pulling in calm, each exhale releasing the day's weight. The mattress cradles you, no longer lumpy but a cloud, and the distant hum of life becomes a lullaby, low and steady. You're not chasing sleep anymore. It's finding you, wrapping you in warmth like a well-worn quilt. Let your thoughts blur, soft as watercolor, until they're just whispers, then silence. The night is kind, the world is still, and you're sinking into a rest as deep as a forgotten dream. Sleep well.